Bobby Sickler is a U.S. Army major currently serving as a Goodpaster Scholar with the Advanced Strategic Planning and Policy Program at the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies. He has deployed as an Army helicopter pilot to Iraq and Afghanistan and is currently pursuing a Ph.D. in the human and social dimensions of science and technology at Arizona State University. Earlier this year, Elon Musk told an audience at the Air Force Association's Air Warfare Symposium that the fighter jet era has passed. Now, he insisted, it's drones. Predictably, the response from the defense community was mixed. Opinion pieces with titles like "Elon Musk was right, the manned fighter jet era has almost passed" and "Sorry, Elon, fighter pilots will fly and fight for a long time" provided insights into the range of arguments for and against Musk's provocative statement. These responses tended to assume that manned fighter jets were about to become obsolete or they were not. Yet as one previous paradigm shift in military technology shows, the complexities of military technology can create a paradox where both perspectives may be equally correct. This is why it's instructive to examine the shift from horses to tanks. Some of the strongest arguments against Musk's assertion rely heavily on a concept called manned-unmanned teaming (MUMT), which is the current state of the art in fielded military technology regarding drones and fighter aircraft. With very few exceptions, today's drones require input from a human to complete their mission, especially attack drones that are designed to kill. This means that manned aircraft have the advantage of being able to make decisions more quickly and reliably in environments where an enemy may make radio communications difficult. However, with the drone operator safely on the ground in a secure area, unmanned aircraft do hold an advantage over manned aircraft when it comes to survivability in dangerous mission profiles. To capitalize on the advantages of both manned and unmanned aircraft, the U.S. Air Force is experimenting with new manned-unmanned teaming tactics that allow these two weapon systems to work together to accomplish the mission. The U.S. Army has been developing this capability with their attack helicopters for nearly a decade now. And this teaming approach to the management of advancing military technology has been tried before. Thinking about the development of technology in a linear fashion implies that new technology invalidates old technology absolutely. In an address to the U.S. Army War College on September 19, 1939, as German panzer divisions rolled through Poland, Major General Herr, the chief of U.S. cavalry, proclaimed that it seems obvious that the machine can not eliminate the horse but that both the mechanized tanks and horse cavalry will be used in future wars. At the time that Major General Herr made this proclamation, tanks were a small fraction of the total force compared to horse cavalry. In 1939, the U.S. Army assigned 10,000 troopers to horse cavalry units compared to just 3,700 soldiers to the tank and mechanized cavalry units. Even then, the most advanced domestic tank design, the M2A1, was equipped with too little armor and a main gun that was too small to effectively compete with the German models of the day. The cavalry general's optimism regarding the future viability of the horse certainly must have seemed warranted. Of course, the war that would unfold over the next 6 years failed to support Major General Herr's obvious truth. A simple, linear understanding of the development of technology would support the superiority of both tanks to horses and drones to manned fighters, but the context of the general's statement indicates that manned fighters are not doomed to follow the same fate as horse cavalry, even if drones improve the way tanks did. Just like explanations for why manned fighters are necessary today and in the near future, arguments in favor of horse cavalry in the late 1930s actually made a certain amount of sense. The U.S. Army of the 1930s didn't know what kind of wars they would have to fight in the future. Only with the advantage of hindsight can one know for certain that the United States would fight in Western Europe, with its well-established road systems, North Africa, with its wide open desert, and the islands of the Pacific, with their minuscule landmasses. Each of these operating environments presented conditions that invalidated the advantages in mobility that horse cavalry held over tanks. Horse units excelled in moving large numbers of soldiers across rough terrain over vast distances. Even today, a horse can move over ground that no vehicle can traverse. The efforts the U.S. Army took to fortify the West Coast in the beginning of World War II demonstrate its belief that it may have had to wage war in the American West, where horse units would have held an advantage over mechanized units. Even though the United States fought its next major war in environments where horses were at a disadvantage, future scenarios where the new technology, tanks and trucks, could hamper the Army's efforts remain possible. The current war in Afghanistan is a prime example. Some 70 years after horses were deemed obsolete by the world's leading armies, a team of U.S. Special Forces embedded with Northern Alliance troops used horse cavalry tactics to defeat the Taliban, because the environment favored soldiers mounted on horses. A single event within a nearly 20-year war does not prove the usefulness of horse transportation on the modern battlefield. However, the thousands and thousands of foot patrols over terrain too rough for vehicles that U.S. troops conducted in the mountains of Afghanistan are exactly the types of missions for which the horse cavalry of the 1930s was optimized. Thinking about the development of technology in a linear fashion implies that new technology invalidates old technology absolutely. This kind of logic implies that Musk's statement must either be true or false, and it fails to capture relevant complexities regarding military technology. The shifting relative advantages of horses and tanks over time demonstrate how questions regarding the superiority of any specific military weapon must account for complex relationships between the way a military fights, or its doctrine, and the means, or materiel, with which it fights. Discussions regarding military technology must embrace the paradox that any military technology is equally superior and inferior to any other technology for future wars. The ways and means of combat are so closely linked that it is useful to consider ways and means as two elements of the same concept. The best means to fight a war, horses, tanks, drones, or fighters, cannot be determined in a vacuum defined by science. It is defined by an army's understanding of the physical and social environments in which the war exists, which also defines the optimal ways of fighting. This environment is constantly changing based on the actions, or ways, of both sides. Further complicating matters, the ways an army can employ are dependent on the means available to that army. There are different organizational limits to how fast ways and means can shift. This means that the amount of time it takes to shift from one way to another becomes dependent on the types of means that an army has to fight with. The industrial base required to build 10,000 drones can't be built overnight any more than the number of horses needed to field a division of cavalry can be raised in a day. Focusing on a specific technology is better than another absent a broader discussion of the type of war in which it will be used commits the future military to a way of fighting that may be inappropriate for their environment. Discussions regarding military technology must embrace the paradox that any military technology is equally superior and inferior to any other technology for future wars. Elon Musk was neither right nor wrong when he said that the age of the manned fighter has passed. He is both right and wrong, depending on the type of combat our Air Force will have to wage in future wars. Under our current concept of air combat, Musk is likely wrong for reasons illustrated by his detractors. Unfortunately for those who would resist shifting resources to an unmanned force, when a conception of war changes, it isn't always on friendly terms. The Polish and French armies of 1938 and 1940 suffered this when they faced the German panzer divisions. The Air Force must accept that there might be a future scenario where manned fighters are severely outclassed by drones and that this shift might happen very quickly on terms that are favorable to some future adversary. If the Air Force doesn't lead new concepts of air combat and develop the means to employ these new ways, then some adversary will force it on the United States. Defense professionals are better off thinking through what these changes might look like absent dogmatic loyalty to old ways of operating. However, the Air Force must also acknowledge this truth while avoiding the trap of linear logic that implies a new technology is universally superior to older ones. When there are only so many resources available to outfit a military, this best of both worlds approach is much easier said than done. The Air Force does not have to be absolutely correct in its approach to combat, just more correct than some future adversary. The key to being more correct will be flexibility and adaptability. As long as the Air Force continues to invite uncomfortable criticism from visionary innovators like Elon Musk and to devote resources to experiment with new weapons, they will be well positioned to recognize shifting concepts of air combat and commit resources appropriately.